All right, guys, so you have chosen Washington's farewell address as one of your documents for this project. And you were warned by Jenkins that this one is one of the most difficult, so just prepare yourself as we get into it. Basically, what we'll do is we'll make it as far as we can into this document in 20 minutes, and then you guys, if you want to continue reading, and maybe you can get a little bit of a rhythm, then you can keep going. But we'll stop at 20 minutes, and we'll just see how far we get. All right, so before we get into anything, this date is probably worth noting. So Washington's farewell address was in 1796. If you don't know what he's saying farewell to, and maybe the people that read this, I'm not sure how it was titled in newspapers. They may not have known what they were getting into whenever they started reading it. But in 1796, George Washington walked away from the presidency. He decided not to run again. And at the beginning of this address, we're going to see him tell the American public that. Basically, hey, I'm not going to do this again. And then he'll move into some other things, kind of his words of wisdom before he retires back to his farm in Mount Vernon. So 1796 was when Washington left the presidency, and he actually only lived for another 3 years. He died, I think, 1799. He got an infection in his throat from a sore throat, and I always think that's kind of sad. It's like, man, George Washington, they're like Native American battles where Native Americans talked about how no one could kill him, and then a sore throat eventually is what ends up taking him down. Okay, all right, that was off subject a little bit. So he starts off, friends and citizens. Sometimes we overlook the greeting at the beginning of a letter or a speech. This is significant because there was a lot of debate about what role the president had or the executive had in their relation to the people. Whenever Washington first became president, there was a whole debate over how he should be called. Should he be like, Your Excellency, the Supreme President of the United States, or what should he be? Eventually we decided he should just be the president, right? Like, this is in England, this is America. And we're not about titles here. So for him to call people friends and citizens, there's a couple things there. It's kind of plain, right? Like, hey, that's what we are. We're not real elaborate, and we don't decorate ourselves with big titles. But it's also, this is what they're about to be, because he's not going to be their president anymore. He's going to retire, and he'll be living alongside of them. All right. The period for a new election of a citizen to administer the executive government of the United States being not far distant, and the time actually arrived when your thoughts must be employed in designating the person who is to be clothed with that important trust, it appears to me proper, especially as it may conduce to a more distinct expression of the public voice, that I should now apprise you of the resolution I have formed, to decline being considered among the number of those out of whom a choice is to be made. Okay, so this first part up here, the period for election of a citizen to administer the executive government, he's saying we're about to elect a new president. We're about to move into election season. And at that time, you're going to need to start thinking about who it is that you're going to elect. And you guys may have felt this last year as, you know, for the past 8 years, we talked about Obama. Well, this time last year, I guess a little bit before this time last year, things transitioned. And Obama, it almost feels like, you know, the president kind of sits back now and, all right, let's see what happens with the next group. And all we talked about last year was Trump, Hillary, Trump, Hillary, Trump, Hillary. And so Washington's saying like, hey, you're about to get to move into that time period. Let me get a few things out there before we move on. So he says, it appears to me proper, especially as it may conduce a more distinct expression of the public voice. Conduce would be maybe another word for cause or something like that. There's probably a better word than that, but cause or create. A more distinct expression of the public voice. The public voice, what's he talking about? In the election. The public voice in the election. That's how we make our voice heard. You always hear that stuff when they talk about voting. Make your voice count. Vote. That I should now apprise you of the resolution I have formed. This is an idea or an action that Washington's going to follow through on. The resolution. It's basically like, Hey, I've got something I want to tell you, something I'm going to do. To decline being considered among the number of those out of whom a choice is to be made. So basically, this whole paragraph is Washington saying, hey, I know I could run again. You guys, some of you may be aware of this, but term limits weren't placed on the presidency until after Franklin Roosevelt in the 1930s. So Washington, right here, is saying, you know what? I know I could run, but I'm not going to. I've had 2 terms in the presidency, and that is enough for me. So he's declining to run again. That's the resolution that he's formed. That's what he's telling the people. I beg you, at the same time, to do me the justice to be assured that this resolution has not been taken without a strict regard to all the considerations appertaining or relating, it's a big word. Of course, this is going to sound weird if I sub that word out. Appertaining to the relation which binds a dutiful citizen to his country. So what is it? What is the relation that binds a dutiful citizen, someone who wants to do their duty to his country? And that in withdrawing the tender of service, which silence in my situation might imply, I am influenced by no diminution, or this is like diminution would be another word for like lessening. I'm sure there are better words, but it's early in the morning. I just had like 2 sips of coffee. I am influenced by no diminution or lessening of zeal for your future interests. Who's your future interest? This is the country. Basically, he's saying the country's future. If you're wondering what zeal is like enthusiasm. Like, basically what Washington's saying is, hey, I'm stepping away from the presidency, but it's not because I'm not rooting for you guys anymore, and it's not that I'm not interested in what happens to the country. I'm very concerned with that. It also, his silence or his leaving the presidency is not influenced by a deficiency of grateful respect or a lack of grateful respect for your past kindness, but am supported by a full conviction that the step is compatible with both. So he's saying this step that he's taking, this is him leaving the presidency, saying, I'm not going to run again. He's saying that step is compatible with the future interest of the country and that it's compatible with his respect for the kindness the country has shown him. And that may seem different from, and we'll get into this in a second, a lot of people may not have looked at this choice that Washington's making as compatible with those things. Okay. All right, let's move on. The acceptance of and continuance hitherto in the office to which your suffrages, so like votes, I think. I mean, I guess you don't see that word used that way too often anymore, but yeah, it is. To which your suffrages or votes have twice called me. He's served in 2 terms, 8 years. Have been a uniform sacrifice of inclination to the opinion of duty and to a deference for what appeared to be your desire. Okay, this might be a good point to talk a little bit about Washington. Okay, so what he's saying is your votes have called me to the presidency twice, and that those were a sacrifice to what he believed duty was, and a deference. That means basically saying, okay, I'll do what you guys want me to do, for what appeared to be your desire. So what Washington is saying is my presidency was maybe not what he necessarily wanted, but it's what he knew the people needed or wanted. New people wanted him to serve. So what you need to know about Washington, again, I'll emphasize it with all these guys. It's not that they were all perfect. These founding fathers, Washington, Madison, Jefferson, they had some big flaws. But one of the things that's so impressive about Washington is that he was always willing to walk away from power. And so after the Revolutionary War, he was like the most famous American in the world, maybe next to Ben Franklin, probably ahead of Ben Franklin by that point. And he could have done almost whatever he wanted, and he left. He said, all right, we won. And he went back to his farm in Mount Vernon. And whenever the Articles of Confederation, which was the government before the Constitution, looked really weak and the country may not survive and states were kind of doing whatever they wanted, Washington is called out of retirement, basically, to preside over that constitutional convention because he looks at it as his duty. And they elect him president. And at the end of his first term, he's like, yeah, you know what? Actually, I'm going to stall because I think we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Basically, what you need to know is Washington was okay walking away from power, which I wouldn't say all the founding fathers were that way, but Washington was. So let's keep moving on. I constantly hoped that would have been much earlier in my power. Okay, this is what I was talking about. I'm glad I didn't say this a second ago. I constantly hoped that would have been much earlier in my power, consistently with motives which I was not at liberty to disregard. So what are his motives? Well, that he couldn't disregard or couldn't ignore. Well, those motives are things like duty. He just told us about them. Respect for the country or care for the country. And you guys know what it's like whenever you have responsibilities on you that you have people counting on you, and you don't want to let them down. Well, Washington felt that for an entire country, which I was not at liberty to disregard, to return to that retirement from which I have been reluctantly drawn. The strength of my inclination to do this, or my ability or desire to do this, previous to the last election, had even led to the preparation of an address to declare it to you. But mature reflection on the then perplexed and critical posture of our affairs with foreign nations, and the unanimous advice of persons entitled to my confidence impelled me to abandon the idea. Okay, I'm going to take this point to remind you, you chose this document, and you chose the hardest one. So this is difficult. You're probably going to see a lot of words that you don't know, and sometimes he's going to use really big descriptive words to describe things that we might describe in simpler terms, but hopefully we can draw these things out so that we can see him. What he's basically saying is, I wanted to retire. I didn't want to be drawn out of retirement. His home on the Potomac River outside Washington, D.C. is beautiful by all accounts, and he wanted to dedicate his time there, and he spent a lot of his time, even as he was president, writing home with instructions on how his estate should be run, and he really was, that was like his retreat in his mind, and physically, even though he didn't get to go there very often, in his mind, he would go back. That was like his safe place. I don't know if you have those, but his safe place is picturing himself at Mount Vernon. Well, he's drawn out of it by public responsibility. So what he's saying here is, previous to the last election, so before his second term as president, he prepared an address to declare it to you. Basically, after his first term, he was going to say, you know what? I'm walking away. Thanks for the chance to be president. It was a good run. Now I'm going home. But mature reflection on the then perplexed and critical posture of our affairs. I don't know how many of you guys listen to Hamilton, but this is, there was a whole lot of tension between America and France and Britain. Are we going to war with Britain? Are we going to war with France? What are we going to do? Neither of them are really respecting us. There was a lot of anger from some portions in America against Washington for not siding with France. Revolutionary soldiers wanted to be paid for, actually, wait, what was that? I forget that last part. I think that was before. Yeah, I'm thinking of something from the Articles of Confederation. Forget that last part. But just remember, there were a lot of people in America that were very critical of Washington for not siding with France. At one point, there was a group that was so passionate about, I guess what would the word? Like, they were inspired by the French Revolution, and there was discontent among a lot of the Western farmers for some policies that the government had taken towards taxing whiskey and things like that. And there was a guy, and I can't remember his name, in Pittsburgh that was ready to start setting up guillotines in Pittsburgh. And if you don't know anything about guillotines, in the French Revolution, that's how they executed like elite members of society and leaders. And so that was kind of the intensity that was present in the States. in the early constitutional period in Washington's presidency. So what he's saying is, hey, I wanted to leave the presidency, but there was a lot of craziness going on, so I had to stay around. And the advice of persons entitled to my confidence, well, those are going to be names you recognize. The people who encouraged him to stay in power, those were the Alexander Hamiltons, those were the Thomas Jeffersons, those were the James Madisons. They may not have agreed with Washington on everything, but they knew that the country needed him if it wanted to survive. Okay, goodness. All right. I rejoice that the state of your concerns, external as well as internal, no longer renders the pursuit of inclination incompatible. So his inclination, we got to remember what this is, because he's not really referring back to it, but we know that this is his inclination to leave the presidency. That's what he wants to do. So what he's saying is that concerns both outside the country, like we're not, I think things have settled down, even though maybe they hadn't quite. I think things have settled down globally, and I think things have settled down internally. And so now my inclination to leave the presidency is not incompatible with the sentiment of duty or propriety. Basically, he can feel good about leaving the presidency now. And am persuaded, whatever partiality may be retained for my services, that in the present circumstances of our country, you will not disapprove of my determination to retire. So basically he's saying, you guys are in a better spot. I think you're going to understand that it's okay if I walk away. All right, I think we'll be able to maybe make it through one more paragraph. The impressions with which I first undertook the arduous trust were explained on the proper occasion. In the discharge of this trust, I will only say that I have, with good intentions, contributed towards the organization and administration of the government the best exertions or efforts of which a very fallible, imperfect would be a good word for fallible, in which a very imperfect judgment was capable. Whose judgment is he talking about? He's talking about his own. One of the things you're going to see that Washington does, if you ever read more about him, is he's always acknowledging the fact, like, hey, I'm not perfect. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm not up to the task of being the president. I'm not up to the task of leading the army. He always says that. Now, I'm conscious in the outset of the inferiority of my qualifications. Hey, what did I just say? Inferiority means basically, hey, there are people, my qualifications are not up to the task, right? I just served as president, but I'm not anything special. Of my own inferiority of my qualifications and experience in my own eyes. There's a good qualifier, because that means someone else could be like, well, in our eyes, Washington, you are the man. I don't know if they'd say that or not, but perhaps still more in the eyes of others. So maybe I need to read further along before I start making comments. Because then he's also saying, hey, some people might think I'm less capable than I think of myself. Has strengthened the motives to diffidence of myself. And every day the increasing weight of years admonishes me, or like pushes me more and more, that the shade of retirement is as necessary to me as it will be welcome. Satisfied that if any circumstances have given peculiar value to my services, they were temporary. I have the consolation to believe that, while choice and prudence invite me to quit the political scene, patriotism does not forbid it. So this is a big paragraph where he's basically saying, this word we wrote here, that he's imperfect. That you may think he's imperfect, that the people who lived through his presidency might think he's imperfect, but that he did his best, and now he can retire. All right. I'm going to go a little bit further because it feels like if that's all that I get annotated, that won't be good enough. So we're going to work through this down to interwoven. We'll work through these next parts, but I'll try and move a little bit faster. In looking forward to the moment which is intended to terminate the career of my public life, this is when he's going to leave office, my feelings do not permit me to suspend the deep acknowledgement of that debt of gratitude which I owe to my beloved country for the many honors it has conferred upon me. Basically, hey, thank you guys so much for how you have honored me in my life. You made me president. You gave me control of the army. You guys love me. Everywhere I go, people are obsessed with me. So, hey, thank you. Washington would have never said what I just said, but that's basically what he's saying. Still more for the steadfast confidence with which it has supported me, and for the opportunities I have thence enjoyed of manifesting my inviolable attachment by services faithful and persevering, though in usefulness unequal to my zeal. Basically, he's talking about his attachment to the country, that it's basically sacred, and that he's been able to function and work in opportunities where he's been able to show that attachment to the country. What are those opportunities? That's like president, leading the army, all that. If benefits have resulted to our country from these services, let it always be remembered to your praise, and as an instructive example in our annals, that under circumstances in which the passions agitated in every direction were liable to mislead, amidst appearances sometimes dubious, or I guess you'd say maybe fake or phony or misleading, vicissitudes of fortune often discouraging, in situations in which not unfrequently want of success has countenanced the spirit of criticism, the constancy of your support was the essential prop of the efforts and a guarantee of the plans by which they were effected. That was really big, and a whole lot was going on there. So I'm going to stop for a second just to kind of paraphrase it. Because what he's basically saying is, hey, things have not been smooth. And there have been moments where you may have been misled, that there have been dubious, where was that? Amidst appearances sometimes dubious, vicissitudes of fortune. So sometimes things did not seem like they were headed in a right direction. And situations in which not unfrequently want of success were affected. What he's saying there is, hey, we weren't always successful. And I think this is a really interesting phrase up here. This was actually the one that I was looking for. That under circumstances in which the passions agitated in every direction. What that means is like he's just saying at certain points, it's almost like people were being ripped apart during his presidency, during the revolution, where it seemed like some people maybe didn't even want the country to succeed. And if they did, they had different visions for what that was going to look like. What he's saying is through all this craziness, that the constancy of your support, whose support? The American people, was essential, was an essential prop to his efforts. So basically what he's saying is to the people, people's support was critical. Because though it was not an easy time through the revolution and through his presidency. So profoundly penetrated with this idea, I shall carry it with me to my grave as a strong incitement to unceasing vows that heaven may continue to you the choicest tokens of its beneficence. What he's basically saying is, you supported me, I want the best for you, even if I'm gone, which isn't going to be that. He'll be gone pretty soon. That your union and brotherly affection may be perpetual. That's a great wish for all of us, even today. Perpetual means constant and forever, basically. That the free constitution, which is the work of your hands, may be sacredly maintained. That's like sacredly is a word you'd use almost for like religion, right? Like a sacred document. So sacredly maintain the Constitution. That its administration in every department may be stamped with wisdom and virtue. That we need wisdom and virtue in the people who are administering our government. Those are our leaders. So I'm going to put over here, wise leaders. And virtuous means good. Wise and good leaders. That in fine, the happiness of the people of these states under the auspices of liberty, I gotta be honest, I see that word sometimes and I don't know what it means, and I Googled it and I still don't really know what it means, but it's basically like, it's like a token of liberty, I guess, may be made complete by so careful a preservation and so prudent a use of this blessing as will acquire to them the glory of recommending it to the applause, the affection, and adoption of every nation which is yet a stranger to it. basically that the success of our union and the wisdom and goodness of our leaders and the work of our hands and all of this will be so impressive that every nation that right now doesn't understand what makes America special will someday see it. Okay, we're just going to say that. It's 25 minutes. That's pretty long. If you're still interested in this, then maybe you could talk to me and maybe we'll go a little bit further together. But hopefully that's enough to give you something to get going on. As he goes through the rest of the document, he's going to start getting into specific problems that we need to be careful and to watch out for. But you can look at those on your own or talk to me. So awesome. Good luck, guys.